10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 209. Hey everybody, welcome back into episode number 209 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. If you are brand new to the show, my name is Nick Manella. I've been creating this podcast for a while now, giving you a short and concise jazz lesson each and every week to help you along the path to becoming a better musician and improviser. This week is no different. We are going to continue our series on jazz articulation. Before we jump into the episode, a quick little bit of housekeeping. If you didn't know, you can support this podcast on the Patreon platform. Patreon is a great place where you can support creators directly and show them that you like their content and keep their artistic adventures alive. So for only $3 a month, what you get with this podcast is you get a PDF of every single episode that we've ever done. That is 209 PDFs, and we keep putting them out every week, so you keep getting to add to your jazz education collection. I've got to thank a bunch of people this week. Again, we've had a huge outpouring of support, and I want to thank you all for that. So thank you to the new members, Frank, Wayne, Sean, Helga, Corey, Patrick, Carl, Rui, and Christian. And I've got to give an extra shout out to Corey because he's actually supporting us at a $5 level every single month. There's a few people out there that are doing that, and that's something you can do. You know, it doesn't just have to be $3. If you feel really strongly about this show helping you along, then you can support us at whatever level you may feel we are worth. So thank you to those people. Thank you to everybody else over there that's supporting us. Really keeps this thing going, keeps it rolling, and we couldn't do it without you. If you want to get signed up, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners. That will bring you over to get signed up, get instant access to all those materials. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So last week, we talked a little bit about some core articulation principles when it comes to playing jazz. We talked about note length, how all of the eighth notes in a continuous eighth note line should generally be legato, and then we should put kind of a period on the end of those lines by using a more marcato sounding accent. Today we're going to venture off of that path a little bit and explore how we can start to mix up our articulation and how to think about approaching this. Maybe a few concepts that we should pay attention to when we want to start to get a little bit more variety in the way that we play. So again, just to reiterate, articulation is a very defining characteristic of your playing. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be somebody that has really thought about how you want to sound in every aspect of your playing, but articulation being a really important one that you should think very, very deeply about. So these are just going to be some examples to maybe get you off and running down your own path of sort of figuring out when you want to mix things up. And we just released on Monday our transcription of the month. And one of the things that I talk about in that episode is how Kenny Dorham really, really veers off the path of what we illustrated last week while still keeping a few of those concepts, just things that sort of universally make something swing. He's a really great example of somebody that has their own style. So that's sort of what we are going after in this episode. So what I've done, if you look at your PDF, I have the same examples from last week, but what we're going to do is we're going to start to mix up and inject some other lengths of notes and talk about maybe why we're doing that. So let's look at example number 1 on the sheet this week. And what I'm going to start by doing is actually playing that example the way that I wrote it last week. So with the exact articulation from last week's episode. And then we're going to dive into how I've switched it up a little bit. So here's the original example with the original articulation layout. Now, if you remember some of the concepts that we talked about last week, the legato, right? We said generally we want to play legato. So, what we're going to explore this week is actually injecting a few staccato notes into the middle of those lines in a really calculated manner, just to show you that the overarching rule doesn't mean that you can't ever step away from it. One of the things that I really like to do that I feel like adds a new texture to my playing is injecting a staccato note inside of my eighth note lines. I feel like it really adds something that will direct your ear away from just hearing the same thing over and over and over again. So if we look at the first example that I have on this week's PDF, you're going to see that I changed a few things. So you will notice on beat 3 of the first measure, I've put a staccato note in the middle of that legato line. Now, if you look at the second measure, the quarter note has changed from legato to staccato. And then I also injected one into, let's see, measure 5 on beat 2. So really, I didn't go that far. I only changed 3 of the notes, and this is the way that I think you should get started with this stuff. Start experimenting with it. Where would sound good to your ears to mix up the length of the notes? This is just what sounds good to my ears. And you'll hear it totally changes the underlying feeling of the lick, of the phrase, when I inject these staccatos into it. So here's what example number 1 on this week's PDF sounds like. And I just love how changing just, a couple of notes here and there, it completely changes the deal. And that's what keeps me coming back to this style of music. There's just so much you can do, so much you can play with. So let's look at a couple of those things. So you'll notice that every staccato that I put in there is on the beat. That is something that I think my ears hear sounds more natural than putting one of these staccatos off the beat. Now, it might be different for you, but that's just the way that I like to handle it. So that's one characteristic of it. The second thing is I'm not using very many of them, right? I'm just really not going that hard, substituting these staccatos for the legatos. I think a few of them go a long way. Now let's look at example number 2, where I've changed something a little bit more, and I actually have gone a little bit heavier with the staccatos. So what I've done is, if you look at the triplets in the 5th measure of the example, I've made all of the triplet notes staccato. And this is something that you might enjoy or you might not like. Again, it's all about experimentation. You'll have to do some of that experimentation on your own. And this is an example of going a little bit heavier on the staccatos. See what we can come up with. Let's check out example number 2 on the PDF. So that might be something that I would do every now and again. I'm not going to do that every time I see a group of triplets, but it's just something that I enjoy the sound of. All right, so let's jump into example number 3 from the PDF this week. This is example number 2 from last week, and I've done the same thing. You'll notice that all I did was I put in 2 staccatos, one in measure 2 and one in measure 3. So again, I'm trying to be kind of subtle with this. I'm not going to go changing entire measures from legato to staccato because it just doesn't work. Subtlety in your playing is really important. So just try not to go overboard. I guess that's a piece of advice that I would give you when it comes to starting to experiment with these shorter notes. So first, let me play the second example from last week with all the legatos, and then after that, I will play the example from this week to show you sort of back to back what's different about them. So you can hear the difference there. Small changes, but a big difference in the way that the line feels. And one cool thing about mixing up these articulations is I find it really spurs the band on. You know, when the other members of the band, the other members of the rhythm section, they hear you doing a little bit of this, they hear that you have some flexibility in the way that you're articulating, it really sort of gives the band some forward momentum because really good rhythm section members will pick up on that and they'll actually respond to what you're doing. So that's another thing that I really love about starting to develop your own articulation style. All right, I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please direct them to the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. That's where we have all those discussions, and it also allows the other people to see some of those questions that maybe they weren't thinking about or maybe they were having trouble with too. So I really like to have all the discussions over there. All right, that's going to about do it for this week. Start to think about mixing some things up for yourself after you have those sort of core principles in your playing. Now start to diverge from that, just like anything else that we do. Thanks again to all of our Patreon subscribers. If you want to go get signed up, get your hands on that PDF we talked about today, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you get instant access to everything. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.